Muchas gracias por venir. Thank you very much for coming. Some of you from very far away. Miguel Ángel from very close, but first I think that maybe we can do like a round robin, just presenting, introducing ourselves, so we know who's in the room, and then I will explain in broad terms the scope of the project. And what we expect to get out of this seminar, but basically the idea is that we have plenty of time to put together 3 case studies where the memory politics kind of crosses exhumations, and what does it mean, because I think we have been trying to do this. We've been trying to analyze the similarities and differences between the 3 cases, Poland, Spain, and Bosnia, and it's really, I think a lot of interesting things are coming up. So we can start here. Monica.
My name is Monica. I'm from Poland, originally from Warsaw. I'm a sociologist and Americanist, but I consider myself a memory scholar or researcher, and I'm writing my PhD about American female veterans of the Vietnam War and how they started to get their voice in the public and how they established a monument to their service. I'm working with Mariah we're going to write a paper together probably, and I also helped her to organize workshops in Warsaw. I'm interested in cultural memory, social memory, identity, and also social movements and questions of gender, this kind of intersection. So this is pretty much me. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Adis Vukanovic. I'm coming from Sarajevo, and I'm working on the topic dealing with past in Bosnia and Herzegovina and also transitional justice. I'm project coordinator at the Forum Civil Peace Service. It's a German organization that has offices around the world, and also in Bosnia, Belgrade, and Pristina and Skopje. It's the Western Balkan program. But I was really involved in the topic of missing persons, and did oral history, took 102 interviews from survivors from the city of Prijedor, and also participated in voluntary activities in excavation of mass graves, and creating the building culture of remembrance of missing people. So therefore I'm kind of like organizing the living memorial in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
But you're a psychologist?
Yes, my educational background is of psychology.
Okay. Well, it seems to me at the time you're outsider. So here I'm Adis Begovic. I'm a forensic medicine specialist. I work in the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Sarajevo, University of Sarajevo. So I'm teaching there also. I'm involved in the process of missing persons in Bosnia for more than a decade, from all the aspects, from exhumation to identification. Although I'm not involved in my involvement is not in I'll say help of the families and general social aspect, but I'm also in contact with the families always through identification, so I got a basic idea of what are the consequences of all that. That's about it, but if you have some questions, I'm here to answer it.
Okay.
Good morning. Apologize because my English is basic, but I'm Keral Soler from the University of Barcelona. I'm teaching in the university, and my PhD was from the study of the mass graves in Catalonia 10 years ago, I think in Spain it was a first study in history about mass graves, and well, from then I continue to study with Paco overall about the mass graves in Catalonia and Spain.
My name is Krzysztof PERSAK. I'm a historian by training, and my main field of interest is contemporary history of Poland. For 15 years I have worked with the Institute of National Remembrance in Poland, which is a huge state institution which has several fields of operation. Basically, the institute is about the archives of the state security Communist State Security Service. It took over the archives of the service and makes them accessible for the victims, for historians, for research, and for public opinion via journalists who also are entitled to have access to the files. So the core of the institute is this archive, which is 90 kilometers of shelves, with containing the archives of 90 kilometers. 90 kilometers, yes. So it's the biggest single archive in Poland, and it brought a lot of new information material on how the communist regime operated. So the institute is concentrated mainly on. It also has a research and education branch, which is concentrated on research on repression and resistance to communism. But also the institute has, which is unique among the memory institutes in post-communist Europe, it also has a public prosecutors branch, which is at the same time is a part of the public prosecutors office of the Polish Republic, and it's focused on carrying out formal criminal investigations into the crimes of communists, but also the crimes from the Second World War time. So Nazi crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. And one of the initiatives of the Institute was the exhumation of the graves or the people who were executed during the communist period. So I was connected with this because at that time I served as a head of the office of the president of the Institute. So to put it simply, kind of a chief of staff of the institute. So I didn't participate in the exhumation myself, but I was engaged in organizing them. Now I'm working for the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw because I left the institute 2 years ago after the political change in Poland, and also I work for the Polish Academy of Science, the Institute of Political Studies, and my project now is on the institutional and legal ways of dealing with the communist past in Poland. So to put
I'm Maria Kristova. I work with Paco in the UNREST project as a postdoctoral researcher, and during these last 2 years I have mostly been focusing on Spain and Poland. So I have done some ethnographic field work and contemporary exhumations being carried out that are searching for the anti-communist fighters during the 40s and 50s. I'm trained as a historian and in literary studies, but I work already for 4 years in an anthropological department, so they have converted me into an anthropologist. I think, we will talk about the project the whole day. So.
Hello, my name is Miguel MUGA. I am a lawyer. I am activist from 15 years in an association about Memory, and we made about 14 exhumations in the Spanish state. My English is very bad, and I am sorry if after I talk in Spanish, because it is very difficult to me to explain something in English.
Yeah, we will do the don't worry, we'll do the whatever translations.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Yo hablo un poco de español.
Perfecto.
Yes, and Alice
Pero-
just said that they also know some
Entiendo más
Spanish.
de lo que puedo decir.
Claro, igual que a mí, igual que yo en inglés.
Sí, sí.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Hola, ¿qué tal?
That's more than enough. So I am Francisco Ferrándiz. I am social anthropology polluting Maraya, and Miriam also, who is here with us. She will tell us also what her research is on a little bit later. So basically, we have had here at CSIC, in this very room and other my office, which is just close to me nearby, we've had a project, research project, basically following the exhumations of mass graves in Spain, civil war mass graves in Spain. I don't know if you've heard that. I mean, you probably heard about what's going on in Spain. They started in the year 2000 more or less, and there has been like a memory boom and important transformations in the way in which Spain looks at the past. This has to do also with a generational change. It was basically the great children of the war, those defeated in the war, who would challenge, like the official narratives of the state regarding the transition to democracy and whatnot. And one of the elements was the exhumation of mass graves, because there were, during the Civil War, 150,000 civilians were executed behind the lines by Francoist troops and paramilitary. There was also Republican repression, but that Republican repression was exhumed right after the war in great numbers, even with forensic teams. And actually, Miriam, can you tell us something about the post-war exhumations? Which is what
Okay, I'm a PhD student. My research is about exhumations that the Franco's regime do during the war and after the war. And this exhumation was focused only in the victims that Franco's regime considered victims of their side. And all the process has a lot of it's a huge archivistic process, a huge with a judicial part, with mechanism of exhumation, with forensic scientists doing the exhumation. So I'm working on that.
It's a very, very important topic because, for example, now in Spain, when we'll talk more about this, but when these exhumations have been done, basically the accusations and Miguel Ángel, who is an activist, has suffered this, and also we, but necrophiliacs open up all wounds that were already healed and whatnot. So when you look historically to the past and to see what has happened with the bodies of the civilians killed in the Civil War, you have like what Miriam is studying is like the post-war exhumations. They were massive throughout Spain. There was specific legislation and support from the state, and there are a lot of monuments in Spain. Every church has like a list of names of those who were executed by Republicans and whatnot. And but at the same time, they continue to kill people and make mass graves of those who were defeated. Then 20 years after the war, we were talking this morning about the Valley of the Fallen. Have you heard, Krzysztof, about this monument here in Spain?
Yes, Valle de los Caídos.
Valle de los Caídos, yes. So it's an interesting place, to say the
I
least.
have never been there.
How long are you going to stay here?
Oh, just I'm leaving tomorrow.
Because these people from Sarajevo and other places, the memory lab people, they came to Spain last year, and they usually go to visit memory places around Europe every year. And I met one of them in a conference in Copenhagen, and I asked her, which was the monument in all of Europe that has shocked you most? And she said, El Valle de los Caídos, by far. So it's a really impressive place. So you have an abbey with Franco and the founder of the fascist party on both sides of the altar, and then probably 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, we don't know how many people, corpses from the Civil War that were brought to the building starting 20 years after the war. So that was a massive exhumation effort throughout Spain, and one of the main problems is that they also kind of took people from Republican mass graves without the permission or knowledge of their families. So they are learning now that they are in this place, and it's a very, very controversial memory place. Then we have some other student who is coming later, Claudia Kerengat. She's working on the exhumations of the transition to democracy. When Franco died, there were also a lot of exhumations, but they were spontaneous and without Miguel's family. His mother actually was involved in one of these exhumations, and they have provided us with all the material. It's in 1978, 3 years after Franco's death. So, but that was basically peasants with their hands, getting all that. And then there is like a new cycle starting the year 2000, which is linked to human rights, and it's a total different. I mean, we think of them as different necropolitical moments with different kinds of victims, different actors, different means, different interpretations, different ritualizations, different political discourses around them. So basically our team in Spain, what we are doing is trying to analyze historically what's been the fate of the corpses, basically of civilians, not front lines, civilians. And but we work first in a very interdisciplinary way, so we have a lot of forensic doctors working with us. So we understand whatever you will say, we will get it immediately because they are always with us, and we understand the problematics also from the in terms of identification, DNA, and whatnot. So we are historians, anthropologists, political scientists, sometimes psychologists also, literary critics, but the thing is that when we started to study the Spanish case, we realized that it was not enough with studying the Spanish case. We had to do it in a comparative way, and that's the reason we extended, and started to invite scholars from Latin America and other places. For example, the Argentinian forensic team works with us, and they are like a transnational. They exhume all over the world, in Timor, in the Central Republic, in Georgia, in many different places, apart from Latin America. So that's the reason we got involved with this thing. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to this project. So when we started to do this comparative work, we had the opportunity of participating in this project called Unsettling, Remembering and Social Cohesion in Transnational Europe. It's kind of a strange name, but I think that the acronym, which is UNREST, you don't see it here, but it's here in the papers. UNREST captures the idea of the project, in the sense that we are thinking about unsettling memories that are uncomfortable, memories that kind of create controversy, are controversial. No? And so basically this project, we are seven partners. Well, I will just briefly say a few things about the project, and then I'll try to explain you what we are trying to do with the exhumations. We are 7 partners, and basically what we have is a theoretical framework. I'll tell you a little bit about the theoretical framework now, which is not as important for our discussion, but so you know where we come from. So we have an administrative section, which is based on Bonn in Germany. Then we have a theoretical work package, which kind of, they provide us with the theory, and then we have to bring in, empirical data, so they have to adjust the theory and whatnot. And then basically what we thought, and I think this is what's interesting in the project, is that there were 2 empirical work packages. And we decided to do, on the one hand, exhumations, which is kind of the closest you can get to raw violence, like unmediated violence, because you have the bones, you have the wounds, you have everything. Well, we can discuss about this later. And that was like the ground zero of European violence, no? Because we applied for this H2020 project within the goal was the cultural legacy of wars in Europe. So that was the topic that interested the Commission. So we decided to do it on the one hand studying exhumations, and on the other hand studying war museums. And there is another work package which is independent from ours, and Krzysztof, Sofia, she's kind of leading in part this. So basically what they think is that the idea was that museums were like, the metaphors we use is like a ground zero or zero zone for exhumations, and black box is what the metaphor for the museums, because the museums kind of encrypt all the tensions, the memorialist tensions, and they come up with a like a narrative, a plot about a conflict that is kind of incorporates the tensions in the country, and finally there is like an official narrative that comes out of the museum. No? So basically, with this tension between exhumations and mass graves, we wanted to know what's going on with memory politics in contemporary Europe. Then I will talk more about exhumations now. then we have another work package, which is work package 1, work package 2 is theoretical, work package 3 exhumation, work package 4 is museums, work package 5 is it's kind of dissemination. So they are working on creating like MOOC courses and all these kinds of things, and basically a web page and a blog, and trying to the outreach is very important for this project also. So we are creating like an academic program also. But we finished now, and they start working on we finished now. And then work package 6, I think is very interesting, and we'll send you the link, because basically the European Union now asks you to produce cultural products apart from the academic resource. So we decided to work with a theater company that's Madrid based. They have done like a number of shows on Spanish memory, and their last show, when we were writing the application, it was on Spanish prisoners in the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, and they won the best prizes in Spain, and also the prize for national literature, the dramatic national literature prize. And what we have done with them is they have produced a play, and basically talking to us, and then they have obviously they could invent on their own, but basically they were taking elements from our research and putting them in another language. That was premiered last year, and the good thing is that now we recorded it, and now it's online and it's subtitled into English. And I would really would like to we will send you the link, so you tell us what you think. But it's particularly important that you tell us what you think from Bosnia, because they kind of mixed the Second World War in the Balkans, the last Balkan wars, and also the Spanish Civil War. They are mixed up. The family.
Yeah, we have a war each 20 years.
Yeah, the last one. The
next one will be probably in 10 years.
In the 90s.
Yeah, in the 90s at Sarajevo. Yeah, it was. So the thing is that the family. It's like a political thriller. It's really interesting the way in which they set up the play, and they have a box. In the family, they get a box, and the box is full of secrets. It's like the Pandora box, and then all the horrors of Europe come up and whatnot. So this is already online and translated into English. It's not the same as watching it live, but we would like to hear from you. So, and then some other scholars in the project are putting together an exhibition in the Ruhr Museum in Bochum, and we still don't know what they are doing. They're kind of discussing which kind of pieces they want to bring in and what kind of effect they want to. So just so I don't talk all the time, because I have this tendency to. So just this is the theoretical framework we are using. This is a paper that was published by two of the scholars, this is not so important for our workshop. It's just so you know that they kind of categorize different ways of dealing with the past, and they understand that the antagonistic mode is the dominant one, which is basically, I mean, it's more complex, and the paper is difficult to, I mean, you have to read it a few times just to understand what they are trying to get at. But the antagonistic mode is basically the antagonistic, you know, it's like us versus them, you know, and then the whole memorial plots are constructed along this line. No? Then they talk about this cosmopolitan mode, which is basically linked to the memory of the Holocaust, and this idea of the primacy of the victim, and the victim's suffering and whatnot. And we understand, but we'll talk about this, that for example in Bosnia, at least international organizations kind of draw from this memory line, which is transnational and is linked to the Holocaust, and it has these few elements here, reflexivity, anti-ideology, compassion for human suffering, but basically it's a focus on the victim and whatnot. And then using the work of some scholars, particularly Chantal Mouffe, they came up with this idea of the agonistic mode. Because what they basically, these theorists said is that the cosmopolitan mode is not strong enough to kind of unmake the antagonistic mode. So we need another memory mode, but that's kind of the theory. And they came with this idea of the agonistic mode, which basically has to do with the fact that there could be coexisting memories in a public space, and as long as there is respect between the different, I mean, we've had like hours and hours of discussion, but just to put it in a single line, it would be like basically that, for example, they understand that the voice of the perpetrators should be heard, not condoned, but that should be, you know, part of the discussion, but not. And so this is basically what we are trying to do, is like checking if this memory, I mean, this frame, this theoretical frame, makes sense. And so what we are discovering is that maybe in the museums they can attribute the museums to different modes or in between modes, but when you come to the exhumations and the complexity of memory politics outside of, it becomes more messy. So we are asking them, you know, how could we put this in motion? Like, for example, some associations, like Miguel, I don't know, Miguel, where would you attach yours? But I mean, this is one kind of joke that practical joke we made in the last discussion. Like, somebody in Miguel Angel's association can be antagonic for breakfast, cosmopolitan for lunch, and agonistic for dinner. So in the sense that there are these modes are available, and associations modulate themselves. They are not just one thing. They can modulate their discourse in different ways, and also they evolve over time. You have evolved quite a bit, and the RNH also has evolved. And so here in Spain we see that we need to put this in motion and to see which are the limits and which are like the seepings, the pollutions, you know, so to speak, between one mode and the other. So, but this is so you know more or less what we are trying to do in the project. So basically, regarding mass graves and exhumations, these are like the main points. But we know they apply in different ways to the different case studies. No? For example, one thing that we have realized is that mass grave exhumations related to wars and crimes against humanity have become a crucial tool in transnational human rights practices. I mean, now every truth commission or every arrangement has to work through the exhumation. Through the mass graves. Maybe there are no exhumations, maybe there are. Sometimes they are just commemorated. Sometimes they are exhumed, sometimes not. But mass graves are kind of a proof of. They may become a criminal scene, as you were saying, Krzysztof, before, no? So basically, also we talk about the ways in which the memory works. Memory around exhumations is influenced by this forensic turn, and this is where you, Adis, can tell us more, no? In the sense that for example, in Spain, it's very clear that historians have kind of withdrawn from the debate. So it's been the forensic discourse has been the most important one in approaching the past. So people, victims, the relatives of victims, basically know about the relatives through forensic reports and forensic ethnographies on the ground when there are exhumations. So this kind of transforms the way in which we think about the past because these new technologies, and we call it sometimes the CSI effect, no? The fact that we watch these programs on TV, the CSI Bones, and there is like a popular culture of forensic science or the crime scene. And it's very influential. So people even go to the exhumation with certain expectations of what they will find there. Just to tell you an anecdote, no? In a very, in a mountain in the north of Spain, in Burgos, they have closed the perimeter for the exhumation. So there was this very old man coming to me and saying like, have they secured the perimeter? So if this old man, from the mountains of the north of Burgos, knows the notion of secure the perimeter, means that it's just a way of saying that we are kind of drenched by this popular forensic knowledge, and this influences the way in which we relate to the past, particularly when there are exhumations. But I know that in Poland this may not be the case as strong as in Spain or probably in Bosnia, but these are the things we want to discuss in the day. As I said, this is the mass grave exhumations are the ground zero of European past violence, and we understand that mass graves are, overall, they are extremely controversial, always unnecessarily controversial because of the emotions that are raised, because of the ability the expression of the violence. The wounds, the bullets, and then basically, although Addis, in our Spanish project, we are also very interested in this forensic term and how forensics is like a new language of dealing with the past and the crime scene and whatnot. We are very interested in this, and we work on this, and we have some researchers, for example, working on forensic aesthetics or forensic iconographies or the forensic logics which are built into the memory blocks, new memory blocks. But basically, for the project, as this forensic term was not incorporated directly into the theoretical framework, basically, with what we are interested in is like, and this is important for our discussion today, the memorial plots that are constructed around these exhumations, the forms of commemoration and monumentalization associated to the mass graves, and also the emotive regimes, because there is a politics of emotions also going on around exhumations, and there are some ways of political correctness. For example, if you use the national anthem that raises certain feelings, that if you don't use it or use the contrary anthem, So that's then the victimhood politics is very important for us in the sense that we understand the victims as processes, not as closed things, as closed. So people, even the idea of victims, for example, in Spain, has transformed immensely, and in part is due to the work of some lawyers, and we can discuss this, Miguel, later. But here, the idea of disappear came to Spain quite kind of late in the process. It was not here at the beginning, but after Garzón and all what happened, and we can talk about this later. Maybe you make reference to this. The notion of that these civilians are disappeared came mostly after 2008, Miguel, after Garzón.
And before did Kiponitko make an inform about this?
Before, but when it really captured imagination,
2004.
2004 started to come with Lithcor and other things, and then in 2008, this big scandal about Garzón kind of put it in the. So suddenly, looking at the same bones, in 2002, we would look at them as execute civilians, and now the same bodies, we understand them as disappeared. And this is, this is an evolution of the idea of the victim in Spain, and I think this is crucial because also victims kind of I don't know how to say it, but kind of compete for public recognition. And we have here in Spain the #1 victims are the ETA victims, victims of Basque terrorism. And for victims of Francoism are struggling to get the same public recognition, but this also kind of unfolds into economic compensations and other kinds of things. So it's a very fluid. We understand the politics is a very, very fluid field, and that's also the social and political alliances and disputes, the artistic elaborations, the way in which, for example, the theater play or movies or documentary, not documentary, but other artists, plastic artists are dealing with this, and the media coverage is also extremely important because it kind of gives the headlines of what's going on. So basically, what we decided, as I already talked about this, is to use these 3 case studies because they were very different. And so Spain is like a pre-Second World War case, and it's one of the important things about the Spanish case is that there is no legal umbrella here, due to the amnesty law, but I'm maybe talking about what Miguel will say later. But this is the president of the Basque government, just in an homage in the Basque country. No? So Poland is an extremely complex case. I mean, all of them are very complex, but the Polish case is, we thought we needed an Eastern European, and Katyn is kind of the mother of the exhumations, so to speak. No? It was very early on, and you'll tell us more about this, and also Monica and Malaya. And then we had the Bosnian case, also because of the forensics, because we understand Bosnia also as one of the most important forensic laboratories in the world, the way in which the STY has operated. So we decided that we will have these 3 case studies and try to apply this theoretical framework to all of them, and see which are the contradictions and which are the similarities, and so what can we learn about exhuming in Europe in the 21st century, basically. But then we also decided to do some kind of historical background, so in terms of, so we can understand how memorial plots evolve over time. No? So here, for example, in Spain, we are now writing a report. We have decided to focus on 3 exhumations in each country. So we can see the differences over time. And, good morning, Faye.
Sorry for being here.
I was just talking about your work, these exhumations after Franco's death in 1978, like Miguel's mother was involved in one of these, very close to here, and not far away from here. And here you have the contradictions of the very Catholic thing, I mean the mourning, the Catholic mourning, also the coffin with the crosses, and then the socialist flags on top of it. So these images are really powerful and tell us a lot about what was the political situation at that moment in time. Then I have like an early exhumation. We have an early exhumation via Mayor de los Montes, 2004, when the bodies were still executed people, and then we have the Guadalajara. This has been a very, very controversial and very famous exhumation that took place in early, 2016, 2017, and so this is more about disappeared, and one of the controversies is related to Miguel's association. So he'll tell us more about this.
So muy duro de Guadalajara.
I know. The Guadalajara branch of Foro for the Memoria.
My mates.
His mates are really tough. So it's been very controversial, but also interesting to understand the memory politics. So we have. I won't go into this because we'll deal.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, and then the Polish exhumations we have here. We have chosen for good or for bad the Katyn one, the Jabachne, and the Powadzki military cemetery. And but it's you have to talk about them more than us. And then in Bosnia, this is Admir Jugo who has provided us with reports on these 3 exhumations. When we told him that what our purposes. These were the ones that he chose for us, because Maraja has been in Poland and knows something about Poland, but we know nothing about Bosnia. So that was done by a Hugo, basically. So this is the frame of the project, our research project, and also the European project. And so more or less, this is where we can start now.
Yeah. I think I will add just a few more words on the organization. Because, as you know, we are recording this session, and we would like to share these recordings at least with our fellow researchers from the other universities, and that's why we use these informed consent forms. So I would like you to, well, there is some letters that explain more about the project. There's also a letter that really explains what your participation means in the project. And then there is this informed consent, which I would like you to read and sign according to what your preferences are. So we will keep those together with the recordings and know what we can do with them. So that is something important that I need from you today, all these signed forms. And for those who have traveled to Madrid, well, from some of you I already got them, but I will need your boarding passes and I will need your tickets. And so if you have them, you just, in the breaks, you just look for me and we'll arrange how to do that. So that's, yeah.
So we organized another. This is like the third one. The third workshop. We had one here in Madrid, only based on the Spanish case. We had another one in Marzo, and there is going to be another one next week in Sarajevo. And so the idea here is to contrast the different cases. So we basically followed, because in the Madrid workshop we didn't know exactly how to do it, but we came up with this idea of having these short presentations and a few questions loosely, so we can organize the discussion in certain ways. And in the afternoon we can have like an open-ended discussion on different topics that may interest us. So now for this first panel, Miguel Ángel will be speaking, and also Krzysztof and others. I understand that you have more or less got the questions.
Yes, I'll try to answer them from. Should I start first?
No, well, yeah. Miguel, so we have here, let's follow the motions.
Bueno, en primer lugar comentar en cuanto a artículos el impacto de las exhumaciones en, digamos, la interpretación del pasado. Sí, ¿cómo hacemos? Ya.
I translate or, yeah, I'll try,
yeah.
But you will have to help me with some of the technical.
Okay.
No, tranquila, intentaré no.
Okay.
No ser muy técnico.
So maybe you can do 2 phrases and then I translate or something like that, because I
Bien. Bueno, que decía que el título de la ponencia de hoy es el impacto de las exhumaciones en la interpretación del pasado.
So the title of the debate is The Impact of Mass Grave Exhumations on the Reinterpretation of the Past.
Y bueno, nuestra organización en un principio sí interpretó que las exhumaciones suponían un efecto importante en la sociedad.
And from their organization, they do understand that the exhumations do have an important impact on society.
Tenemos que partir que, como contaba antes Paco, las primeras exhumaciones en España se realizan por parte de familiares sin ningún asesoramiento técnico.
The first exhumations in Spain, they are done by families without any technical support.
Y hemos de reconocer, a pesar de las diferencias, que la primera organización que hizo una exhumación con intervención de arqueólogos y antropólogos, fue la RMH en el año 2000 en León.
The first organization that has done an exhumation with archaeologists and technical support was the Association for Recuperation of the Association of the Recovery of Memoria. What's
The recovery of historical memory.
Historical
The
memory.
president will
The
be-
it's ARMH. So this is another association.
The president will be with us in the afternoon.
Digamos que nuestra organización nace posteriormente y ha participado en 14 exhumaciones.
Their organization was started afterwards, and they have participated. They have done 14 exhumations.
Y digamos que ahora mismo no participamos por varias cuestiones críticas con tanto la evolución legislativa y de la situación de impunidad como por la privatización de este tipo de exhumaciones.
But now they don't exhume anymore because of the critical position towards legislation, impunity, and privatization of this kind of exhumation system.
Tenemos que partir de que en España se mezcla las graves violaciones de derechos humanos que se produjeron contra los defensores del Estado democrático.
So in Spain, they mix.
Tenemos que partir de que
Starting point is
de las graves violaciones de derechos humanos se produjeron en un marco que posteriormente acabó en una guerra civil.
So we have to start from the idea that the violations that were done in Spain, they origin in a civil war.
Que las personas, digamos, que el ejército, que fue el que dio el golpe de Estado, al final ganó y estuvo gobernando en España 40 años.
And the army that did those violations, they won the war, and after that they were governing for 40 years.
Que estas primeras exhumaciones que veíamos ahí del año 78, que eran privadas y familiares, había una gran reivindicación política de los defensores de la República.
So in these first exhumations that they did just after the transition, they were important political statements, and these statements were in defense of the Republic. That is the Second Republic that was preceding the Spanish Civil War.
Que la llegada de la democracia a España fue un régimen, una cuestión pactada con los dictadores, con la dictadura fascista, y que eso supuso una paralización desde los años 78, 80, que fueron las primeras exhumaciones familiares.
So that the arrival of democracy in Spain was pacted with the dictatorship, and the first exhumations in the
Que después de las primeras exhumaciones del inicio de familiares en los años 70 y 80.
So after these first exhumations done by families just in the years of the transition,
Y ante el supuesto intento de golpe de Estado en el año 81 por parte del ejército de nuevo,
and then with the intent of a state coup in 1981 by the Spanish army.
Digamos, incluso todos los partidos políticos democráticos, incluso de izquierdas, paralizaron cualquier intervención sobre exhumaciones o recuperación de la memoria histórica y de las violaciones de derechos humanos producidas en España.
So after the state coup, most of these families and organizations, they actually stopped exhuming the victims of the Spanish Civil War.
Esto se reanuda, como decía antes Paco, en el año 2000.
In 2000, they start again with the exhumations.
Entonces, nuestra organización lo intentó tratar como un problema de violación de derechos humanos y como un problema de crímenes de lesa humanidad en el marco de lo que se estableció en el Estatuto de Nuremberg.
So then their organization, they tried to understand these violations as crimes against humanity, and understood within the Nuremberg statute.
Nuremberg Statute.
Mhm.
En ese marco entendíamos que son crímenes de lesa humanidad que no prescriben nunca, y nuestra organización siempre presentaba denuncia para la intervención por parte tanto del juez como de la policía judicial en estas exhumaciones.
So understanding the crimes in this way, they would also understand that they don't prescribe, and they would always try to, through judges and through legal procedures, to get recognition for these crimes.
El objetivo de hacerlas era denunciar y que algún día fuera, como corresponde en cualquier Estado de Derecho, el Estado el que se encargara de realizar este tipo de investigaciones por ser lo más garantista.
So the objective of these actions was always that at a certain moment the state would take responsibility for these crimes and take action.
En un primer momento, y ante el Estado todavía no estaba, tenía una política concreta sobre esta materia, y se consiguieron que algunas veces hubiera intervenciones judiciales para al menos identificar los restos cadavéricos y hacer las pruebas de ADN.
In the beginning, there were some moments in which there was judicial presence at the mass grave exhumations, and they would also be involved in DNA identification.
Y se produce un cambio trascendental en el año 2004. Hasta el año 2004 gobernaba la derecha, que es una derecha que sigue reivindicando y no se desmarca de la dictadura franquista, al menos en cuanto a la denuncia, y siempre habla de principios de reconciliación entre las partes.
So in 2004, for them, there is a radical change, because until 2004, the Spanish right-wing party was governing, and this is a party that for them doesn't really break with some Francoist dictatorial traditions. So they have links with that time frame.
Ese cambio en la llegada del Partido Socialista y principalmente del presidente Zapatero supone un cambio, sobre todo porque se mete en la agenda política una materia que hasta ahora estaba tapada, que es el tema de la memoria histórica, y se empieza a debatir sobre esta materia.
So in 2004, the Socialist Party in Spain starts governing, and they take up in their agenda the topic of historical memory.
Eso, digamos, ese proceso finaliza con la aprobación de una ley que mal llamada de Ley de Memoria Histórica.
And this process ends with the approval of a law which we call the Law of Historical Memory in 2007.
Y que en esta materia va a ser muy influyente en cuanto a dos problemas. Uno es el reconocimiento de una memoria personal y familiar relacionado con el ámbito privado.
Mm-hmm. So there are two problems connected with this law. One is that it recognizes memory as something which is relegated to the realms of the family.
Y que va a renunciar a la aplicación del derecho internacional aprobado y reconocido por el Estado español, en el cual va a administrativizar y a financiar que sean las asociaciones de memoria histórica las que se encarguen de la realización de estas exhumaciones.
Mm-hmm. And it renounces international involvement in these exhumations and within the realm of international law, and it administrates the exhumations of these mass graves through associations like his and through family groups.
De hecho, esta ley ha sido utilizada por algunos jueces para decir que esto ya no era una cuestión de investigación judicial y penal, al decir que había una ley administrativa que regulaba la obtención de los restos como cuestiones meramente arqueológicas o de traslado de restos de un lado a otro.
Yeah, so this law actually has been used by some judges to say that the mass grave exhumations of the Spanish Civil War are not anymore a case of judicial law, but they are rather an archaeological site.
la prueba de que esta legislación primero no se desarrolló y que no ha sido no es una legislación a aplicar desde un punto de vista del respeto de los derechos de las víctimas, es que tras la llegada al gobierno de la derecha se ha paralizado absolutamente cualquier tipo de iniciativa relacionada con estas graves violaciones de derechos humanos.
And then later, when the Spanish right wing starts coming again, actually they stopped doing anything with this law, and all the initiatives are paralyzed.
Esto, aparte de otras cuestiones, ha supuesto una gran discusión dentro del movimiento memorialista en el sentido de qué se tiene que hacer para transformar la realidad política en la materia de violaciones de derechos humanos. Una parte ha considerado que se sigue privatizando y que se pueden buscar recursos privados para realizar las exhumaciones sin denuncia y con entrega de los restos a los familiares.
So this has turned into also into a debate amongst memory activists in Spain. So there is a group who supports the idea of finding financing to a certain extent and to keep on doing these exhumations within the realms of family groups.
Y otra parte del movimiento hemos considerado que estas violaciones del derecho internacional y la privatización de las exhumaciones suponen la posibilidad de que al Estado le interese el que desaparezcan las pruebas de graves crímenes de lesa humanidad sin que les afecte solo cuando si simplemente es un traslado de restos sin denuncia.
So, and another group of the memory activists, of which Foro por la Memoria is a part, they consider that probably the interest of the state in this privatization of mass grave exhumations is to destroy or to make disappear the proofs of these crimes.
De hecho, los partidos de derecha, como el Partido Popular y Ciudadanos, reuniones que hemos tenido con ellos, siempre cuando han intentado hablar de memoria o de exhumaciones, hablan de fomentar el que se produzcan siempre y cuando sean simplemente para llevarlas a un cementerio o lo que se está entendiendo como una memoria privada, personal, de que los familiares tienen un derecho a saber dónde están sus víctimas.
So the logic within this discourse of privatization is that you can exhume only to answer to the needs of the family, to mourn the dead, and okay, to bring them to the cemetery.
Del País Vasco, pero eso no está dentro de digamos un programa de política de memoria institucional en el que se respete a este tipo de víctimas.
So for them, this privatization of memory blocks the right to truth, justice, and reparation, and it blocks judicial and national recognition of these victims.
Un ejemplo que yo quiero que si tenéis tiempo veáis las diferencias, y nosotros el movimiento ha ido intentando denunciar el trato diferenciado de víctimas que comentaba ante Paco con respecto a las víctimas, por ejemplo, de terrorismo, es leerse la exposición de motivos de la ley de memoria referida a las personas que fueron asesinadas del bando republicano y que os leáis la exposición de motivos de la ley de víctimas del terrorismo.
So they invite you to read the text, which is the law for
the prelude to the law, no?
Yeah, which I don't know if it actually exists in English. But anyway, if you would compare the prelude to the law for the victims of historical memory, so those are the victims of the Spanish Civil War, and the prelude to the law for the victims of terrorism, so we enter now in this competition of victims.
En la de la ley de memoria se llama a la reconciliación y a los valores del consenso que se produjo en la transición, es decir, cuando se pasó de la dictadura a un sistema democrático.
So in the law for historical memory, this text refers to the idea of reconciliation and consensus, which are important words and ideas that were produced during the Spanish transition.
Sin embargo, en el preámbulo de la Ley de Víctimas del Terrorismo se hace un desarrollo de los principios de verdad, justicia y reparación y de las exigencias al Estado español de lo que tienen que hacer, como por ejemplo participar en actos de homenaje, reconocerles como la intervención de fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad del Estado en los homenajes, el que haya garantías y reparación, el que no se las pueda ofender. Digamos que se ha trasladado todo el derecho internacional a ese preámbulo.
So in the prelude to this law for the victims of terrorism, they do refer to international law on the right to truth, justice and reparation, and they call for the state to intervene in acts of memorialization and reparation and all this kind of.
Por eso, y ya pasando a este ha sido, digamos, una visión de cómo está jurídicamente y la legislación cómo ha evolucionado ante el fracaso de esta ley de memoria y ante la visión que es como si fuera una cuestión no de Estado sino una cuestión partidista, dependiendo de quién gobierne, se actúa o se deja de actuar, independientemente de que las actuaciones nos gusten o no, las del gobierno del PSOE.
So with regard to the failure of this law, and also with regard to seeing that this law for historical memory can be used in different ways according to who is governing the right or the left and the interest that they have in actually doing something with this law.
Se ha vuelto a una, digamos, otra vez desarrollo legislativo por comunidades autónomas, por distritos, digamos.
So they have the reaction to this has been that the Spanish autonomous regions, so Catalonia, Basque Country, and so on, they have started their own legislation on war crimes.
En la que tenemos que tener viola el principio de igualdad de las víctimas en el Estado español, porque si eres víctima en Andalucía, pues tienes una ley que tiene una serie de derechos y una serie de protecciones, una serie de intervenciones del Estado, puede la comunidad.
So this would violate, according to them, the equality amongst victims, because there is a different treatment of victims in a different autonomous region. There is no equality for all the victims in the Spanish state.
Y por ejemplo, si eres andaluz, pues tienes eso; si eres madrileño, no tienes nada. Porque en un lugar gobierna el PP y en otro gobierna la izquierda de Podemos y el PSOE, o del PSOE y Ciudadanos.
So in this sense, if victims in Andalusia, in the south, they have a legislation, but in Madrid, for instance, there is no legislation for the victims of the Spanish Civil War, and this depends on who is governing where. So in south of Spain, there is a left-wing party governing, while in Madrid there is a right-wing.
Nosotros hemos sido críticos constructivos con estas legislaciones porque, por un lado, sí estamos de acuerdo en la intervención de las comunidades, por ejemplo, en políticas de reparación o de verdad, como los lugares de memoria.
So they have been critical with these legislations in the autonomous regions, although they recognize that these autonomous governments, they should be involved in some of these measures for truth and justice and reparation.
Pero somos críticos porque se hace un desarrollo otra vez de competencias que no corresponden a las comunidades autónomas, interviniendo en lo que son el tema de hoy, exhumaciones de víctimas de graves crímenes contra la humanidad.
But they are critical because it's not the competence, according to them, of the autonomous regions. It's not the competence to answer to crimes against humanity.
Aunque ha habido mejoras en el sentido de decir que tiene que haber una intervención estatal en las exhumaciones y que tiene que haber la participación de un protocolo para realizar las mismas.
So there has been it has become better to a certain extent because there is some kind of state support through these autonomous legislations.
Al fin y al cabo no fuerzan o no obligan a que, porque no pueden, a que el Poder Judicial intervenga y trate estos temas como corresponde a víctimas de graves crímenes contra la humanidad.
But in the end they don't oblige the judicial power to intervene in these legislations.
Y como conclusión, luego si queréis entramos más en debate, ¿no? En preguntas, lo que sea.
And as a conclusion, later we will debate further.
Esto deriva de una cuestión simple en España.
This derives from a simple question in Spain.
Las víctimas de graves violaciones de crímenes contra la humanidad y de desapariciones forzadas de los demócratas que defendieron la Segunda República o que fueron represaliados por estar en el lado republicano, no tienen el reconocimiento y condición de víctima por parte del Estado español.
That the victims of crimes against humanity, so those are the people who were defending the Spanish Republic during the Spanish Civil War, they are not recognized, their status of victims is not recognized by the Spanish state.
Y eso supone que, por ejemplo, haya un tratamiento no regulado de, por ejemplo, de las exhumaciones. Yo esto lo discutía a veces con Paco o nos preguntaba cuál era nuestra visión. Por ejemplo, en los graves crímenes que se han producido ahora en España, pues, que sé, el atentado que hubo en Barcelona, los coches de los yihadistas, rápidamente se intervino para que las víctimas no fueran sacadas por televisión y se mostraran sus caras.
So this results in a different treatment of victims in the Spanish state, because this is something he has discussed a lot with Paco, because if you think, for instance, of the a terror attack that has been in Barcelona 3 years ago, last year, there was right away an action from the state to protect the victims, to not have their faces on television and so on.
Sin embargo, esta privatización y esta falta de intervención y de legislación estatal,
but on the other hand, the lack of state support and state legislation
hace que, por ejemplo, las organizaciones que participan en exhumaciones, a veces con criterios diferentes o con buena voluntad para intentar intervenir en la sociedad, sacan fotos directamente de los cadáveres recuperados de cerca y con las familias al lado, sin que haya ningún tipo de protección.
Yeah, so the lack of legislation on the mass grave exhumations of the Spanish Civil War makes that some of the organizations take photos with good intention to intervene in Spanish society, but still there is no protection of media coverage of these victims.
Y entendemos que en un momento que la influencia transformadora que pudo tener y de influencia para que fuera una cuestión de Estado, se ha estandarizado a una política puramente personal y familiar y de traslado de restos a un lugar que se dice en España un lugar decente o un lugar apropiado, que serían los cementerios, ¿no? Pero no se trata del problema trascendental de defender o reconocer los derechos a la verdad, a la justicia y a la reparación de estas víctimas de graves crímenes contra la humanidad.
So the evolution of the mass grave exhumations in Spain hasn't been, although in the beginning it has had a big impact in Spanish society, but the evolution hasn't been towards the recognition of truth, justice and reparation, but it has been going towards this privatization and just exhumation to bring the bones to a decent place, but nothing further than that.
Y tampoco ha conseguido que, a pesar de que tenemos, hay un cálculo entre 170.000 desaparecidos o personas en fosas comunes, el movimiento político y social es un movimiento que se ha mantenido gracias primero a las redes sociales y a la evolución de los medios, páginas web, etcétera, a una, digamos que una tecnificación en la que han intervenido profesionales como sociólogos, antropólogos, abogados, que han mantenido esa duda, y al temor del Estado de que si se rompe por el lado de la memoria esos graves crímenes contra la humanidad pueden afectar al sistema político que tenemos actualmente.
So thanks to the social movements, there is a continuity in the mass grave exhumations, and there is continuous support. Also, there is some kind of technification, so there is more involvement of anthropologists and archaeologists and so on. But there is a fear from the state that these memory processes they would break a certain political status.
Prueba de lo cual es que los partidos del régimen, por ejemplo, ayer, antes de ayer, el Parlamento español vetaron la tramitación de una ley que pudiera suponer la ruptura de la impunidad de los crímenes cometidos por la dictadura, que hay algunos cometidos en los años 70 y con personas que tenemos, policías que tenemos en vivos ahora mismo en España.
So an example of this is that yesterday or the day before yesterday, the right-wing party, okay, has
PSOE.
and
PSOE
PSOE,
Ciudadanos.
yeah, so this is the establishment parties in Spain, so the Spanish Socialist Party and the Partido Popular, they have voted against a law that could possibly end the impunity of Francoist crimes, which some of them have been committed in the 70s. So they have closed that possibility. Yeah? Thank you.
You're welcome. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you, Miguel Ángel. There are already a lot of topics on the table, and the idea is that by bringing in different cases, we kind of understand better each of the cases, you know, by shedding light from other spots. So now, Krzysztof, can give us your first reaction to the question.
Yes. Thank you. I must admit that being not a memory scholar, I found these questions quite difficult to answer because they are from a perspective that I never took. So I would like to speak about 3 cases of exhumations in Poland, and probably I will answer some of these questions indirectly.
It is also just to guide to a certain extent the debate. Don't worry too much.
Miguel Ángel made like a very free understanding of the question.
So,
fine.
So it shows actually the same cases that I had in mind. The cutting exhumations, cutting being a symbolic name for exhumations in different places, not only the cutting itself. The Jedwabne exhumation and the Powolsky military exhumation, but I will speak about them in a different order. So I start with cutting, and then Powolsky and then Jedwabne, because Jedwabne is somehow different from these two ends. And I think there is some parallel between cutting and Powolsky cemetery exhumations. As you know, in 1940, the Soviet Politburo decided to execute 14,000 Polish prisoners of war who were taken prisoners in 1939 after the Soviet Union invaded Poland, working together with Germany. Germany invaded on 1st of September, and Soviet Union entered the eastern territories of Poland on the 17th of September 1939, and both invading countries divided Poland exactly into 2 equal halves. The Soviet intervention in the war came as a surprise for Polish authorities, and they issued an order not to fight with the Soviets, if not provoked by them. And because of this, the Soviet Union took about 200,000 prisoners of war, and 14,000 of them being officers, and also
Just 14 or 40?
14,000.
14,000.
Being officers of the army, and also members of the police, of intelligence, foreign intelligence, counterintelligence, military gendarmerie, and forces like that. And they were kept in three prisoner of war camps in the Soviet Union. Besides that, the directive of the Soviet Politburo of March 1940 decided that a number of political prisoners will be also executed. And as far as we know from documents that were released in 1990s, altogether 21,000 people were executed. As 14,000 of them were the prisoners of war, and about 7,000 of them being political prisoners who were detained in different prisons in the occupied territory of Poland. And of course, as you know, that this crime came to the light in 1943 when the Germans discovered mass graves in Katyn and organized an exhumation. They formed an international commission of forensic experts because it was a great opportunity for Germany to accuse a member of an anti-Nazi coalition of committing such a big crime, which should be labeled as a war crime or as a crime against humanity, although the term was not coined at that time. So the Germans exhumed 4,300 bodies and were able to prove with no doubt that the perpetrators were the Soviets. After the Soviet Union captured this territory, they organized their own exhumation to prove the perpetrators were Germans. And indeed, a commission headed by Nikolai Burdenko, one of the eminent doctors, announced that the results of this investigation shows it was the Germans who perpetrated the crime. And the Katyn case became in Polish historical memory, in Polish historical consciousness, an archetype of a communist crime. There was a memory war going on for the whole post-war period between the communist propaganda, which maintained, according to the Soviet versions, that it was the Germans who killed the Polish prisoners of war, and between the propaganda and the private memory, notably memory of the families who believed that the perpetrators were the Soviet NKVD. And during the perestroika, even before the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Polish government agreed with the Soviet government that there will be a search for the graves in two different places. Not Katyn, but in Miednoje, in north of Russia, and in near Kharkov, which is now Ukraine. At that time was the Soviet Ukraine. So the first search for the mass graves started in 1991 and was continued in mid-90s. And extensive exhumation works, archaeological and exhumation works, were carried out in these two places. And the purpose for these exhumations was to locate the mass graves and organize a Polish war cemetery at these locations. It succeeded. In Kharkov, 15 mass graves were found. They were opened, and some of them were exhumed. The big graves were not exhumed. The size of graves was from several dozen bodies to several hundred bodies. So, because of a lack of time, only the smaller graves were fully exhumed, but the skeletons, not the bodies, because these were dry graves where the bodies were occupied, were not treated independently. The bones were arranged according to the, better. Skulls separately, long bones separately, in order to count the victim. And then they were buried again.
Wrong principle.
Pardon?
It's a wrong principle. If you divide the bodies.
Yeah, they were divided there. So there was no attempt of individual identification of the bodies. At that time, I think the genetical methods were not developed sufficiently to be able to compare the DNA from the bodies with the DNA of the family members.
Which year? Sorry.
It's mid-90s. Mid-90s, yes. The works were carried out there between 1940. The initial works that confirmed that the graves are there lasted only 2 weeks in 1990, and then during 3 seasons between 1994 and 1996, there were extensive exhumations, particularly in Kharkov. In Miednoje, also, as far as I remember, 24 mass graves were located, but these were wet graves, and it was particularly impossible to divide the bodies one from another. So they were only located, they were marked, and then the Polish War Cemetery was organized there. These 2 cemeteries were opened in the year 2000. There were also some research made in Katyn, but a very limited one in mid-90s, in order to confirm that the graves are still there, because there were some gossips that after the war the Soviets removed the bodies and took them away somewhere. But it confirmed that the mass graves are there. There are 6 big mass graves in Katyn. These are the graves which were organized by the Germans in 1943. So the 3rd cemetery was organized in Katyn and also opened in the year 2000, as far as I remember. What we do not know is the fate of the 7,000 political prisoners. Some of them were executed near Kiev, at the outskirts of Kiev, at a place called Bykovnia. It was a place where the Soviet authorities executed all the political prisoners, and among them a number of Poles. But there are some information which is not confirmed that their mass graves can exist in some other places in Russia or in Ukraine and Belarus. And so we know least about the fate of these prisoners, of these political prisoners. So as I said, the Katyn became an archetype of the community. What was very striking was that these prisoners of war, the victims, were not killed by a firing squad, but they were killed by shooting directly into the back of their skulls by individual executioners. And during the investigation, which the Polish Public Prosecutor's Office carried out, one of the heads of provincial NKVD offices was questioned, was interrogated, and he described in detail how these executions were carried out. And his testimony was confirmed by the findings on the spot, by the findings during the exhumations. So the memory of Katyn is very important for Polish historical consciousness. There's also a social movement behind cultivating this memory. There's an association of Katyn families. These are the children or grandchildren of the Katyn victims. Also, several years ago, a Katyn museum was opened in Warsaw, which displays the artifacts found during the exhumation in Katyn and in Kharkov and in Miednoje. And the exhumation at the Powolskie Cemetery is to some degree similar to that Katyn exhumation, because it's an exhumation of the victims of communist crimes which are committed on a large scale, I would say. It was not a mass crime like Katyn, where several thousand people were executed during a month. It's a bit different, but still very some similarity. In 1940s to mid-1950s, several thousand people were condemned to death by communist courts because of anti-communist activity, because of being active in anti-communist guerrilla in 1940s, and the knowledge about who was executed and when, and that these people were executed because they were condemned to death, there existed for many years. I think the recuperation of the memory about these victims started in 1980s, after the Solidarity movement in Poland, when during the 1980s clandestine press the samizdat was published, and a lot of discussion was going on about the communist crimes. So we knew quite well who was executed. We knew quite well when they were condemned to death. The families knew that, but their bodies were never given back to the families so that they could organize a burial of them, and the burial places of these people was unknown. So they were not disappeared persons in their terms because we knew what happened to them, but in some sense they were disappeared persons because the families didn't know where they are buried.
Missing persons.
The missing
More
persons,
like
yes.
missing
Yeah,
persons.
missing persons. And from the archives we know that in the central prison in Warsaw, at Rakowiecka Street, about 300 people were executed between 1948 and 1955. Between 1945 and 55. And in the beginning of the 90s, after the fall of the communist period, there was an outburst of public interest in communist crimes. There was even a notion in public discourse of filling the blank spots in our history. And at that time, the list of the people who were condemned to death was published by the Minister of Justice. And also, in 1991, a law was passed by the Parliament which provided for annulation, for cancelling the court judgments which were issued in case of people who were involved in pro-democratic, pro-freedom, pro-independence activity. And I think that most of the families of these people who were executed filed these cases in courts to have them rehabilitated, and also they received financial compensation from the state.
But they achieved it. I mean, they could overrun the death sentences.
Yes, they could. There was a special law passed by the Polish Parliament in 1991, if I'm not mistaken. But at the beginning of the Polish transformation, the very beginning. So there was public discourse about these executions. There was a possibility to rehabilitate the victims. The families received compensation, and also there was initiative by the Ministry of Defense to commemorate the victims, those who were executed at the Rakowiecka prison, and a monument was built at the Powolski Cemetery, at the section of the cemetery called Łączka, which means in Poland a little meadow. And here I should return to this to make a step back in my narrative, because I forgot to tell you that although the bodies were not given to the families, the bodies of the executed people, after 1956, during the destalinisation, the families were able to receive some information from grave diggers, at which area at the cemetery these people were buried, and the families started privately commemorating them there, lighting candles at this place, coming to this place, bringing flowers, and so on. And this continued for years. And in 1990, if I'm not mistaken, a monument was raised at this plot of the cemetery. It was in the form of a wall with the names of the people who were executed. But what's striking, there was no initiative to exhume them. There was not even an idea of exhuming the victims, and that is the question why. I don't have an answer for these questions. Why, although the Ministry of the Defense had an initiative to commemorate them, to raise a monument, it didn't come to their minds that maybe we could exhume them and provide them proper burial. And no one did it. No one came with such an initiative until 2011. So, if we have this first question, is it necessary to open mass graves in order to initiate processes of democratic memory in post-conflict situation? My answer is no, because this memory process has been initiated quite early, but without opening the graves. On one hand, it's probably well, and I think, from my point of view, it's probably quite good that the initiative to open the graves and exhume them quite as that, because at that time we had the methods to identify DNA methods to identify the victims by comparing the DNA from the bones with the members of family. And this initiative to start the exhumations in Powązki Cemetery came from the Institute of National Remembrance, which was, as I mentioned, engaged already for 10 years in research on repression and resistance. And it was a personal initiative of the president of the institute, Łukasz Kamiński, a friend of mine, who was the first person to propose to do something that the Polish state probably should have done many years ago. The institute worked together with another institution, the Council for the Protection of the Memory of Martyrdom and Fights for Independence, a very long name, which was responsible for maintaining war cemeteries and other memorials. And between 2012 and 2014, remains of about 200 people were exhumated at Powązki Cemetery. In this case, in difference to the Catholic exhumations, the remains were treated individually, and the samples of bones were taken in order to isolate the DNA from them. But this, and it was the idea from the very beginning to identify the victims, and in some perspective to organize a proper burial for them, which would be a state organized business. So in difference to the process in Spain, for instance, all this exhumation was initiated by the state, both in Katyn, where the council with a long name was responsible for carrying out that, and in Powązki Cemetery, where it was the Institute of National Remembrance which initiated them. How this it didn't start so easily. when the exhumation started. And if we had the question how the exposure of raw violence conditions memory or attitude to memory, we can see this process very clearly at Polonia Cemetery. At the very beginning, the administration of the cemetery was reluctant to give permission to dig there, to give permission to remove trees which were growing on this plot. And after the first graves were found, opened, and we saw the bones, skeletons in there, and these were not individual graves. They were not mass graves, but they were, I would say, collective graves, because in one pit, 2 or 3 people were squeezed. In the biggest pit there was, I think, 8 bodies. Because after the execution, when one night, for instance, two people were executed, we were taken to the cemetery and buried in one pit. So when we saw the pits and we saw the bones in them of the people who were squeezed together, it started the work of imagination. It initiated the empathy. And after the first graves were opened, there was more engagement on the part of the cemetery administration, of the city government, of the other agencies of the state. What was also very important, and which also I think contributed to shaping the historical memory, was the finding that these people were also killed by being shot directly into their heads, like in Katyn. So the effect of this fact was making a mental parallel between the executions which were conducted by the Polish communist authorities with this archetypical example of communist crime in Katyn. I think it was very important, very important finding and very important factor shaping the understanding of history, because it showed how brutal the regime was, and also it showed that how the bodies of the people were treated, with no dignity, with no individual treatment. They were buried in unmarked graves for decades. What was also striking was that some of the graves were found under the paved alleys on the cemetery. And also what we found out, that part of this plot where victims of executions were buried were later reused to new burials in 1980s. And this posed a very difficult technical and legal problem, because we believed that when the new graves were dug there, the remains of the people who were buried earlier were probably dug deeper into the ground. So to reach to them and take them out, it would be necessary to remove the later graves from this plot. And we found out that there was no law which would allow for doing this, because the law didn't foresee such a situation. So we had asked the president of the country to draft a new piece of legislation to overcome this problem, which has been done. What's also important because there was a decision to identify the bodies that were found. It obviously engaged the families because we appealed to the members of the families to provide their samples of their genetical material. And I think this involvement of families was very important because it started a social movement behind this exhumation. Behind this exhumation, I think this social movement has two pillars. One of them are families, and another one are people who volunteered to take part in the exhumation, because it has been perceived as something very important, that something very important is happening in the country, and many people, especially young people, volunteered to help in the exhumation. It also became the exhumation, identification, and proper burial of the victims became an issue in which the state was engaged. After some time, the president was engaged in it, and meetings at which the family members received certificates confirming identification of their family members were organized in the presidential palace with the presence of the president. So it was risen to a very high level and became a political matter. So far, out of these 200 bodies which were found at Powązki Cemetery, about 50 has been identified, which is, I think, a very high percentage and a great success. The main problem now, because this process has been halted recently, because of the lack of comparative material, genetic material from the family members. That is our main problem now, to obtain this comparative material. And now, very shortly, I come to the Jedwabne exhumation, which was quite different, because it had nothing to do with the communist crimes. It was connected to the war crime perpetrated in 1941, when after the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, and they entered the territories which were occupied by the Soviet Union in 1939, they incited the local population in Ukraine and in Poland to organize pogroms of Jews. And one of such pogroms with several hundred victims occurred in Jedwabne. The victims were herded in a barn and burned alive by their Polish neighbors. It was in the presence of the Germans, but they didn't take active part in the pogrom, as far as we know from archival sources. And revealing this fact in the year 2000 by Jan Tomasz Głos in his book Neighbors, came as a great shock to all Poles, I would say, because it undermined the self-perception of the Poles as victims, as only victims of the war, or innocent victims of the war. It showed that in some cases Poles were also perpetrators, and there was a massive public debate which followed the publication of the Gross's book, and it coincided in the year 2000 with the creation, with the establishment of the Institute of National Remembrance. So we all were prepared to study communist crimes, but our first greatest challenge was not communist crime, dealing with the communist past, but dealing with this wartime crime. And I was responsible for coordinating a research project on Jedwabne, which was which produced 2 volumes. One volume are the scholarly studies, and the second volume are the archival documents. But as I mentioned, the structure of the institute was such that it had several departments. One department was the research and education, which was responsible for the research project on Jedwabne, but there was also a public prosecutor's office in the institute, and it initiated a formal criminal investigation into the Jedwabne massacre. And in the framework of this investigation, the prosecutor decided to exhume the remains of the victims. And it was in the midst of the Jedwabne debate, which was very controversial because in this debate we had also negationist voices of people who maintained it was impossible that Poles murdered Jews during the war, that it was the Germans who were the perpetrators. So the exhumation was perceived as an ultimate means of clearing what happened, what really happened. The problem was that the Jewish community of Poland, the chief rabbi of Poland, Michael Szudwig, was against the exhumation because of the religious reasons that Judaism forbids interfering with Jewish graves. And as a result of this came a kind of compromise, which was, I think, quite unfortunate, that the grave will be located, that the top layer of ashes, small fragments of bones will be inspected, but when the fragments of skeletons in the anatomical order are found, they will not be touched and will not be taken out of the grave. So it wasn't a proper registration, in fact, and first of all, it didn't answer for the question of the number of the victims, and what became very controversial is that during the archaeological work which was done there, and during the inspection of these top layers of the ground, over 90, I don't know the English name for it. If we have the ammunition, it's composed of the shell and the container with the powder.
I don't know how it's called in English either.
Google Translate.
Yeah, I'm just lacking the word in English.
The bullet and the shell.
The shell,
Yeah.
the bullet and the shell. Yeah.
I think
So,
so, yeah.
I think shell. Yeah. All right. So over 90 shells were found, and these were, I'm not mistaken, 97 shells were found, and most of them were shells from German Mauser rifle. So it was interpreted, or over-interpreted immediately as a proof that the perpetrators were Germans. Because after these exhumation works, the institute organized a press conference, and before these shells were inspected in the criminological forensic laboratory, it already was exploded as a news that the Germans killed the Jews in Jedwabne. And it still serves as an argument for negationists. But the forensic inspection of these shells showed that they were from the First World War, or they were from the later part of the Second World War, because some features and how they were deformated shows that they were fired from the German machine gun MG42, which was produced from 42 on. So it was not; they could not be fired in 1941. But the debate about this exhumation is still going on, and it's still remembered. And even now, there are voices that this exhumation should be continued and completed. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Krzysztof. A lot of things are crisscrossing, and obviously the contexts are radically different. But what is important for us today is this workshop is to understand how exhumations mobilize public memory. So now let's move to Bosnia for our first contact. Alice, what has happened in the last few years?
Bosnia has a really complex history now, in 800 years. So we have 3 different crimes involved in Bosnia. First is the second level of crimes. The second crimes are crimes related to political killings in socialism, with Tito leading the Yugoslav Republic. And the third are the latest were in 92-95. The first 2 of these were actually never historically, in terms of exhumations, checked. Or there was a public opinion formed that they should be checked. So after this war, they are kind of just thrown on the side and totally forget. But also, it's not my. I wouldn't discuss them at all. There are enough things in latest work to discuss. I saw these 3 exhumations. You would choose. There are numbers of them. They are. I would discard the Alpash most, even if it's from a political point of view. It is important. It's not big. They are bigger. Like Tomashica mass grave. It's the biggest primary mass grave in Bosnia. Well, we'll come to that. So the special thing about Bosnia in late war is there is no winner. There are no political winner. The country was, after the war, after the Dayton Agreement, is divided into 2 different parts: the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republic of Srpska. And the good thing about it, the politics feel the need. They felt the need close after the war to start the process of finding missing persons and exhumations in order to prove, actually, in some light, to prove who made the biggest crime. Whether the Bosnians or these ones in the Republic of Srpska. So the 2 institutes for the missing persons are formed. One in Federation of Bosnia and the other one is in the Republic of Srpska. And the most important thing that the exhumations were led by the government court, state court.
So we understand it could be like the Bosnian version versus the Serbian version or Serbo-Bosnian version? The whole exhumation process started on the level of country. So the court, the state court, was actually the one who was judicial in charge and everything. There are 2 separate institutes, one in Federation and one in the Republic of Srpska, that actually collected the information on mass graves, talked with the people. They were trying to precisely determine the number of missing people, etc.
And there were also, on that level, they are not two separate processes of exhumation. They are one process. But if in Federation part, if we are looking for Serbs victim, the Serb will conduct the exhumation. It was organized, and they will lead first exhumation on the field, but there was no experts in Bosnia who knew what to do in terms of those, I would say, legal exhumations. And shortly after, in a few years, Bosnia managed to form the team together with the ICPM, the International Commission for Missing Persons, and the process continued even now, 23 years. It's not still finished. About 30,000 on the end of the war. About 30,000 missing people were declared. Till now, about 70% of those is identified. About 4,000 to 5,000 people is still missing or are unidentified. The meaning of unidentified is the same problem in Poland. They may be exhumed, but there are no relatives, because there are no relatives to confirm the identity. Why is that? The whole families were killed. There was no descendant. There was no parents to identify someone. Especially difficult when it comes to DNA method is if you have to identify there are three brothers. If you don't have children, you can't say who's who, and etc. So the process. What's the important thing to notice here? Undoubtedly, exhumation they need to start early after the war. Postponing them for whatever reason, it's not good for a truth. So I would say there are three types of reasons why to start exhumation. One is political, the other is legal, and the third one is historical law anthropology. If you have exhumation led by political reasons, that's not good, because politicians will always try to prove that one side was bad and the other side was good in the whole process or something like that. The best way to lead the exhumation is the legal way. Just to clearly prove what's the truth behind it, just to document stuff and present it as a raw document, as a raw truth. That's the best start to start something called the memory of democratic memory. Because if you base that memory on something that's not entirely true or entirely clear, the consequences can be really damaging. Like in Bosnia now. Why I'm saying that? Even the excavation were started quite early. The process was really delayed. 20 years of exhumations is quite a long process. And the findings are irrelevant. The findings are really true and they're really good. But after some period, politicians and historian, driven by politician decisions, actually started to adjust the truth on each side. So, to answer the first question, is it really necessary to open mass grave? It's not. It's not necessary. The democratic memory will form anyway, but will it form in a right way? will it be the truly the history and the memory that country should, on the end, really flourish, I would say. The most important stuff around exhumation is actually to focus exhumation on start just to heal the families, the relatives, because it's only way to really heal the public health in that manner. Families who didn't find their relatives, they know they are missing, and they are expecting to be found 20 years, are really have some, I wouldn't say psychological issues, even if that's also true. But it's really important to deal with the process right away and to help families heal. That should be the first start of the whole exhumation process. Because what's the problem? What was the problem in Bosnia? I will give you one example. There was one mass grave in Herzegovina, the southern part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we were looking for five people from Bosnia, and it was a great hole. It was 150 meters deep, we found on 120 meters we found 5 Bosnians, but on 130 meters we found 150 Germans. And when we tried to phone the German embassy, the one guy from the embassy came and said something like this: "It's thank you for finding our soldiers from the Second War, but you put us in such a position, and you actually what you did is you made a lot of problem for us finding them." 150 of them, because Germany, as he said, has about 2 million of missing persons, soldiers, and the closest cemetery for the German soldiers is in Croatia, actually, in Split, town Split. And he said it will cost Germany to the whole process of burying them will cost Germany about 80 million euros. So, what's the point of this? The point is the whole exhumation process has its duration. After some period, the initial historical, political, family reason for conducting them can be really twisted on the end. So it should be done anyway, but my point is it should be done rapidly. It should be done like the exhumations, I would say, if there are exhumations from a war that's going on, that's relatively young, they have a biggest impact on the democratic memory. The exhumations of graves that are connected years after, they could have impact, but I'm afraid more and more from political reasons on the end, not to discover the real truth, the real history of reason. Those are the things that we should always afraid, actually. Bosnia had had an opportunity, unfortunately, had an opportunity to deal with it on a large scale. A lot of mass graves, we, on some level, we managed to get the whole process of exhumation to, I would say, to perfection. The whole identification process to perfection. DNA method in Bosnia was started in 98, as I remember correctly. There were exhumations before that conducted on anthropological method. We proved that they are in 30 to 40% wrong. We managed to form teams of people who actually working now all over the world, like ICMP, who started working in Bosnia now. It's international organization, and it's really important because the forensic experts dealing with that field all over the world actually have a really I would say they are not experienced, but also they can't get enough knowledge to get in the process from the start and to put it on right foot. So the knowledge and the knowledge of mass graves and how to exhume it is really important to write it so others can be educated in that field.
So Alice, I have one question regarding what Miguel Ángel was saying, because in the case of Bosnia, what kind of separates it from the other cases is because, as I understand, exhumations are crime scenes, or some of them have been crime scenes, which where evidence was being built to bring perpetrators to the international courts.
Yeah,
this is not the case in Spain.
The Bosnia is mainly driven. They're mainly legal exhumations, driven by the courts. Even today, the government court is actually issued the order for exhumation. None of the exhumation in Bosnia can be conducted without court order. Each of them must be. The good part about it, because they are not conducted separately, there is a huge statistical base for all of them. There are huge statistical base for evidence from evidence regarding the surroundings of the grave and evidence regarding the body itself in terms of injuries, cause of death, etc. And we, even if there's a lot of mass graves in Bosnia, we have quite good base of knowledge for all of them. And I think it's a mainly consequence of that. How can I say it? It's the whole process is driven really. The whole process is guided, but with one institution. There are no separate exhumations. Everything is collected in one place, and you have complete information about it.
So could we say then that, for example, in this case of Spain, it was a bottom-up process, like people just in the 70s starting, and then in the 2000s with problems and the debates and whatnot. In Poland, we have the state-led exhumations, at least the contemporary ones. In this case, it would be internationally, at least connected to this criminal court in the to the ICTY. So, in terms of looking at how different they can be, because could you say that exhumations kind of were imposed on Bosnia or the Balkans?
So exhumation were
imposed by the international organizations or
No.
as part of the peace agreements, or what was the involvement, or what was the importance of the ICTY or
Well, it
in
was
promoting exhumation?
it was. They were not promoted by ICTY. I would say they were promoted mainly by politicians there in order to give something to ICTY. I would say mainly by Bosnians they were promoted actually, because why not Republic Serbs? Because more of it's statistically relevant. The biggest number of mass graves is actually victims from Bosnia, not from Republic Serbs. But they are also on the other side. They were driven by Bosnian politicians. ICTY was agreement, political agreement, because they couldn't decide where to judge them, in Bosnian part or Serb part. So the outside institution was chosen actually to justical the whole legal process to be valid as it can be. As a consequence of that, they also organized the forensic team, the ICTY organized, who firstly was committed to give a knowledge to the locals and to try to teach them how to conduct proper forensic. I would say even they were experts from all over the world, they also learned how to do it for a few years and stuff. But they were good experts. They made a good basis for all the process. Afterwards, as a consequence of that, the good DNA labs, the good forensic labs, the whole. There's one thing that cannot be forgotten. That the whole process cost a lot. I mean, a really lot. And the main reason why government don't want to actually conduct it is because they don't want to pay all the costs. So the moment of the international agency in Bosnia was also partly because they helped finance the whole project. Because probably the government couldn't do it by themselves.
Okay, so now
I think we took a lot of time
Yeah.
for the.
we have a coffee break now, but the thing is that we have also time to come back to this in the next session, and also in the afternoon it would be like an open debate, and we can just start to connect things and see what's the logics, the different logics at work in the different places. And
Maybe this whole talk might didn't seem connected and stuff, but there's a lot of things in Bosnia that actually that are interested. About maybe 5 hours of talk. To explain them all. I tried just to summarize it.
Thank you very much to the three of you, and now we have a coffee break. Do we have to go downstairs? Or?
Yes.
Yes.
This is
Okay. At the
you know where it is. So
downstairs.
yes, downstairs.
And so we will continue in half an hour more or less, and build up, on top of what we've exposed so far. Thank you very much.